Hey everybody, my name is Melissa Wenzel. I work for the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, and I am the Built Environment Sustainability Administrator. Here in Minnesota, we are trying to change how we view and work within the building material management system. It's kind of a tough haul these days, but we are committed to the sustainability efforts that focus on preservation and reuse of buildings, reuse of building materials, and recycling of parts. So let's get started. The history starts with our landfills. The regulations for construction and demolition landfills have remained largely unchanged since 1988, even with the development of the 2005 Minnesota Pollution Control Agency Demolition Landfill Guidance Document, which was created so that there would be more consistency in the siting, design, monitoring, and operation of C&D landfills, including creating specifications for the three classes of landfills, depending on the type of waste collected. At that time, C&D waste was assumed to be inert, and therefore accepted at certain types of unlined landfills. Only C&D landfills that accept both C&D waste and industrial waste were required to have a liner and collect leachate. The release of the Demolition Landfill Guidance Document led to the installation of monitoring wells at more C&D landfills to collect groundwater data. With this additional data from the C&D landfills, our agency staff noted the presence of arsenic, boron, and manganese at unlined C&D landfills across the system, with concentrations exceeding the drinking water health-based values set by our Minnesota Department of Health. These findings raised questions about the previous assumption that C&D materials are inert and led to the agency to revisit the protections and monitoring needed when this waste is managed at end of life through land disposal. A complete summary of the data is available in a report that you can find on our agency's website called the MPCA Groundwater Impacts of Unlined Construction and Demolition Debris Landfilling Report. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency estimates that 600 million tons of C&D debris were generated in the United States in 2018, which is more than twice the amount of municipal solid waste generated in the same year. In order to determine the amount of C&D debris generated in Minnesota, the MPCA uses annual reports from permitted solid waste facilities, which include the types and amounts of waste generated. While the MPCA additionally collects detailed municipal solid waste generation data from counties, that same level of granularity isn't required for construction demolition debris data. Furthermore, while our state's efforts to reduce municipal solid waste generation and recycling more residential waste has grown, the same prioritization has not historically been given to the reuse and recycling of C&D materials. Our agency estimates that about 20% of C&D material is currently recycling, despite many of the constituents in the C&D waste stream having more potential for reuse and recycling. At this point, our agency has limited data on C&D material handled outside of the solid waste stream. So in 2018, our environmental state agency held 4 stakeholder meetings for organizations and individuals involved in the C&D sector across the state to provide feedback on opportunities and barriers within the current material management system. 100 stakeholders participated in one or more of the 4 stakeholder sessions that were held in Crookston, Duluth, Mankato, and St. Paul, so covering a good chunk of our state. At each session, participants discussed a set of questions in small facilitated groups. Our agency's staff documented and coded 750 discrete comments and identified emergent themes. As a follow-up to those 4 initial sessions held in 2018, our agency convened 2 stakeholder groups in the fall of 2019 to gather more input on approaches for improving the environmental protections and sustainability of the state's building sector. The Rule Advisory Panel was created to focus on end-of-life management with the ultimate goal of rewriting the state rules for construction demolition landfills, mostly for groundwater protection purposes. In contrast, the Sustainable Building Group, the group that I represented, worked to develop recommendations for reducing the environmental impacts of the full building system, prioritizing activities and strategies that aim to extend the useful life of existing buildings and materials. So, in an effort to identify opportunities for reducing the environmental impacts of our state's building sector, our agency conducted a study on the generation and composition of construction demolition materials originating in Minnesota and disposed of at permitted solid waste facilities like C&D landfills. The goal of this report was to gain a stronger understanding of the material categories and prevalence of those materials within the C&D waste stream. The results and analysis completed in the study help our agency and our state look at how different materials are being wasted, which is useful in determining how to improve building material management strategies for recycling and reuse. For instance, are there replacement materials that could be more durable and have a longer life before being disposed? What reuse and recycling markets are strong in Minnesota and surrounding states? What markets need support and expansion? And how can Minnesota diversify markets to make them more stable? Answering these questions will allow our environmental agency to define program strategies and identify priorities to most effectively prevent building material waste and identify management methods to keep materials in use as long as possible before disposal. Here in Minnesota, we don't have just a moral, racial, social, and environmental reason for addressing this topic. We have a legal one too. Minnesota has a material management hierarchy listed in our statute that requires our agency to focus on prevention and reduction of waste first and sending materials to our landfills as a last resort. The role of our sustainable building group was to focus on the material management hierarchy. The group was created to identify system gaps and opportunities for improving the sustainability of new construction, building preservation, maintenance and renovation, building removal, and materials management across Minnesota. The stakeholder work group represented a large range of industry players, including local government staff, architects, building preservation specialists, product manufacturers, reuse retailers, material recyclers, deconstruction and demolition managers, and landfill operators. Members represented their organization and similar organizations across the state, acting as a liaison between the work group and external parties interested in the recommendation development process. Members were selected based on their expertise, commitment to communicating within their sector, geographic representation, and ability to work on a team. Our full work group met every 4 to 6 weeks throughout the year, and 5 topic-specific subgroups met as needed in between the full work group meetings. The subgroup topic areas included upstream building design. This subgroup recommended strategies to reduce the environmental impacts through building design and material choices. Material value. This subgroup recommended strategies for creating market infrastructure and demand for various reused materials. Material processing and recycling efficiencies. This subgroup identified the processing steps necessary to ensure an efficient assessment, deconstruction, and distribution of materials, and provide recommendations to ensure effective storage and movement of reuse, recycling, and waste materials. Next, regulation for collaboration. This subgroup recommended new statewide or local regulations, policies, sample ordinances that support collaboration practices and material reuse. And finally, the new financial system subgroup. We know that the current financial system was not created to incentivize and support the capture of construction and demolition materials for future use, for example, reuse, recycling, etc. This subgroup met at the start of the year, but decided not to meet separately from the broader work group, as the recommendations coming from other subgroups were likely to have a large influence on the financial ideas put forward. The year-long stakeholder process involved MPCA staff and external presenters providing relevant information and facilitated work group discussions about sustainable building and materials management strategies, limitations of the state building system, and existing frameworks and tools available to support transitioning to a lower impact approach. Workgroup members also identified priorities and goals they hope to address with this workgroup's recommendations. The workgroup brainstormed subgroup ideas, using the specific subgroup charters and the overarching workgroup goals as guides. The subgroup teams brainstormed 65 unique concepts that would encourage more sustainable building processes, material selections, and material management within Minnesota. In order to narrow down the list of 65 unique workgroup concepts, subgroup members evaluated their specific list based on the following criteria: reduces greenhouse gas emissions, creates resiliency to climate change, reduces toxicity to the system, follows the waste management hierarchy, prioritizing reduction of strategies first, and then reuse and repair strategies, and finally recycling, promotes equitable systems, provides sustainable trained local jobs, is practical to implement, is measurable, and has a focus on equity-related issues. One concept that came up quite a bit is making sure that it applies and is accessible to both the metro portions of our state and the more rural parts of our state, and that it touches on all building types: commercial, residential, single-family, multifamily, etc. Using the scores from an evaluation process, subgroup members identified their top 3 to 5 concepts. This generated a new list. Workgroup members individually ranked the 22 ideas produced by the subgroups. The list of 22 ideas and their ranking led to the selection of the final 5 system change ideas. During the final stage of development, the subgroups dissolved, and the workgroup members formed new teams for each of the 5 final ideas. The idea-specific groups added detail and refined the recommendations before presenting them to all workgroup members, our agency's leadership, members of the Rural Advisory Panel workgroup, and members of the public that chose to attend. In order to create an inclusive and transparent stakeholder process, all of our Sustainable Building Group meetings were open to the public and external input was encouraged. The Sustainable Building Group workgroup reached consensus on these 5 final ideas. In cases where the ideas were more conceptual, additional research and discussion by subgroup members and MPCA staff helped solidify concepts to be more specific and tangible actions. Our workgroup members concluded their involvement in the stakeholder process by advising statewide implementation of 5 recommendations and supporting activities in order to improve the sustainability of Minnesota building sector. And those 5 final recommendations, as you can see, are: establish a statewide deconstruction training program, creating incentives for reuse and preservation of energy efficient buildings, create a deconstruction ordinance template that local jurisdictions can adopt, create, implement, and enforce a diversion requirement of construction and demolition waste, and create an incentive program that encourages the reuse and repairability of building materials for new construction and building renovations. The slide is a little messy to look at, and that's deliberate. This is our building material management system mapped out. And each of the 5 final recommendations that our work group developed aim to improve different aspects of the building system, but they strongly depend on the implementation and success of other recommendations. For example, for the deconstruction training program recommendation, the goal is to improve reuse and recycling markets. Markets are needed for materials that come from deconstruction. We need to strengthen partnerships and workforce development. Partnerships are needed with existing programs that focus on deconstruction training and skill building. That would lead to us being able to create deconstruction and demolition certifications. We've been told that certification requirements need to be established for both deconstruction and demolition to help level the playing field and move towards a more cost-comparative system. And that could lead us down the path for us to create a deconstruction ordinance template that local units of government can use. Passing deconstruction ordinances that require certified teams to perform the services help incentivize and drive demand for this type of trained work. And upon completion of the construction demolition composition study, we received the following recommendations to help further construction demolition data sets, as well as progress towards state sustainable building material management goals. The recommendations to the state are to routinely update Minnesota's statewide construction demolition composition research. We agree with that. Increase facility participation in future studies. We only sampled a few of the C&D landfills in Minnesota. Conduct statewide C&D facility at the gate surveys. One can find out quite a bit just by talking with the haulers and looking to see what they have to haul. Create a robust and thorough contractor, hauler, and retailer survey. We're actually doing that right now. And also implement statewide reuse and recycling requirements for construction and demolition materials. Great idea. So we are working on some current developments, and that includes creating that template for a deconstruction ordinance. We've put forth a funding request to create a deconstruction training program statewide, and we're providing quite a bit of assistance to cities and counties across the state. As successes are available, we share those successes that stem from cities, counties, and organizations. We're also circulating the final recommendations to gather additional and diverse feedback, refining the details in the proposed programs and legislative requests. This follow-up work focuses in large part on defining specific metrics and targets for each of the recommendations, ensuring realistic yet ambitious goals. The development and implementation of these recommendations will heavily depend on the support and statewide involvement of numerous partners. In some cases, the proposed programs from the stakeholder process will be better initiated and managed by local units of government or industry experts. Further, we continue to support the efforts of our partners, our stakeholders, our local government, and organizations that are furthering the goals of more sustainable building material management. For example, we would like to feature Better Futures Minnesota. They have a deconstruction training program where they train people that are recently released from incarceration on deconstruction, among other service opportunities. So on the right, they're deconstructing an old house in northern Minnesota. And on the left, they are giving us a tour of their material reuse center where they sell the materials that they've deconstructed. We have a small county landfill up in northern Minnesota that actually has a diversion project that they're working on. It's a pilot right now, but they are actually diverting materials from the construction demolition landfill, fixing them up and selling them locally. Last time I heard is that they've had, I think, 3 or 4 different sales so far, and people are really excited to learn about when the next sale is going to happen. So this has definitely sparked a lot of energy and enthusiasm within that jurisdiction. Here's a few more items that have been pulled from the landfill and sold, or attempted to be sold, locally. And another close-up of that deconstruction project in Duluth, Minnesota, not too far from Lake Superior. So these houses were built in the 19-teens and had been vacant for several years, and they still have really good quality wood, old growth wood, that made up the frame of the houses. In addition to other materials that were likely reused, these materials were able to be harvested from this house and sold locally within the Duluth area. Better Futures is the theme of this part of the presentation. Here are staff from Better Futures who are deconstructing a nature center in a suburb of Minneapolis. You can already see the quality beams that are being removed from this particular nature center and reused in other projects. So when cities actually dedicate their energy towards making sure the buildings that they have ownership of, that they get deconstructed, that actually sets the movement forward for other projects to be deconstructed in other cities. One of our partner programs, Morrison County Historical Society, let us know that they have an older building that needed a little bit of repair, but in some cases it's just the building, the door or the windows that need replacing and other parts repaired. And the rest of the building is actually still quite functional. And so this is an example where fixing one part of the building actually preserves the whole building. In Minnesota and probably around the United States and other countries as well, we have a lot of grain elevators that were made out of wood and no longer needed in their current functional form. So there are some valuable materials within the grain elevator, but it is a little tricky to deconstruct a building like this. I understand that makes a lot of sense. However, once building materials are valued at the point where it makes sense to deconstruct this building, well, somebody might have a really good, strong business in the future. Until then, these buildings just stand where they're at. I really enjoy giving a shout out to Rethos Places Reimagined. They're actually providing training to realtors, to do-it-yourselfers, and others who want to learn how to restore or preserve buildings. And in Minnesota, we have record high home prices and a lot of people not able to afford the average median home these days. There's a lot of old buildings, for us old is over 100 years, that if you gave it some upgrades, it could last a lot longer than if you were to tear it down and replace it with a new house. So I covered a lot in a very short amount of time, and there's so much more I could cover, but I wanted to give you a bit of a taste of what Minnesota is doing at this point. Feel free to go to the web link that I have listed on the bottom of this page, and you can sign up to receive monthly updates. Look for the Sustainable Building and Construction and Demolition Materials Management section and sign up for updates. It's a long title, but it represents the work and effort that's being done by both the Rural Advisory Panel and the Sustainable Building Group. So thank you for watching this presentation and for considering reaching out to me to share your successes, your lessons learned as you navigate through the building material management system. We're working really hard on making our system more sustainable, and we welcome being able to connect with others and want to learn from you. So feel free to drop me an email, and thanks again for watching. Have a great day.